Three, two, one, and we are live. David, good to see you, buddy. Thanks for
Good to
coming
see you
back on the show. How you
too.
doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing fantastic. I'm happy to be with you.
Love it,
Yeah.
man. I just sort of texted out on some social media platforms this morning. I was like, any day is a good day when I get to talk to David Hoeflein. So,
Oh, thanks, dude.
so I'm pumped, man. Thanks for being here. Yeah, we were just catching up a little bit off air, but how you doing, man? What's going on in your life?
What's going on? Lots going on. My family life is changing rapidly. My baby girl, my daughter, is starting to walk and crawl, and she's mobile
Oh, that's
now.
so
So we're
crazy.
having to baby proof everything. But it's tremendously exciting to see her little personality come out and see her doing her thing. And my wife just launched a macaron business. You know, those French sandwich cookies, those little pastries, and
That's awesome.
that has been a crazy wild ride of something that she launched as like a business slash hobby, and very quickly it was like, okay, you decide, do you want to make this a business, because this thing is running. Like, social
Wow.
media took off, orders took off for Thanksgiving, and so now we have
That's
a
awesome.
convection oven showing up at our house, and the thing is, God's really blessing. It's so cool to see it, and it was actually the fulfillment of a prophetic word for her. This whole thing, so that's been really fun to be a part of and support. I'm the official taste tester, so you can see my reviews on Instagram, and I'm also a dishwasher. So
Okay. All right.
yeah, those are my two contributions. Sometimes childcare as
Yeah.
well. So yeah.
Yeah. Those taste tester, man, that sounds like such a difficult burden that you've got to bear, but
It's the cross I carry.
suffering for Jesus, you know,
Yes, my waistline,
it's the price you
certainly.
got to pay. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. A moment on the lips, you know what they say.
Yes, I bind that.
Yeah, man. Well, that's awesome. It doesn't count during this time of the year, but maybe in January, you just gotta, start to cool things back a little bit.
I know that,
Um,
but I actually started like eating less during the day, because she makes them a lot of times after the baby goes to bed. She does all this stuff, so I eat less during the day just so that I can accommodate the calories in the evening.
that's good wisdom, man. That's smart.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, last time you were on the show, I just wanted to ask you about how this went, because last time you were here, we talked a little bit about you had that event coming up. It was a prophetic challenge that
Hmm.
was going on over the weekend. I think it was just within a few days after the last episode that
Yeah, the
you were on
Prophetic
here.
Edge Challenge.
Yeah, man, the prophetic edge challenge. How did that go?
It was crazy. It took off. It was like I think all in all, there's over 200 people that were in the challenge.
Really?
Yeah, and we had live sessions that were live streamed and on Zoom. And I think the average Zoom attendance was about 40 people. Some went up to like 50 people.
Yeah.
But we had people getting, different prophetic ministers and leaders were teaching, and then they were prophesying over people right on Zoom. And it was, I think, not a Zoom, almost every session, people were weeping on the Zoom call, like as the Lord was touching them, which
Wow.
is, on Zoom, that's not easy to like thing to have happen because of the disconnect,
Hmm.
from the tech.
Right.
So I was just between the scale of people that participated, a lot of people ended up watching it after the fact, and the personal impact it made on people's lives. I was just really happy, really grateful to the Lord, and it ended up being a cool symphony of voices. These are all everybody that I asked to be speakers at the challenge were some of the most influential people in my life, but they were all from
Mm.
different seasons of my life, and so they all converged together to bless people that joined the challenge. So, and then the other cool part is people went live. I gave people an assignment to respond to the live sessions with like
Okay.
coach questions and activations, and then they would go live in the group to share how that went for them, or what God was doing in their life along the way. So it was super interactive. Yeah, it was a
That's
great time. I
awesome.
hope to launch another one in January, but that's still, an embryonic stage.
Yeah. That's so cool. there's something that we do with our church every year. We've done it for as long as I can remember. That I've been here, we do sort of a prophetic presbytery at the
Mm.
beginning of each new year. We usually have, I'm trying to remember, like I think it's the first Sunday in January. We usually dedicate toward doing something related to like talking about the vision, kind of refreshing people on the vision of the church, but also like vision for the new year. And then we take however many Sundays it takes. It usually ends up being, like a handful of Sundays where we'll take out some time. And we've got a team, a handful of us that will do it, but we'll prophesy over like every person, every
Oh,
church member
wow.
that comes that wants it.
That's great.
Um, and but this past year, it was really, really cool. So last January, because of the pandemic and everything, like we were fully online and live streaming services. So what we did was we scheduled times before and like in between and after our services where people could reserve, we tried to do like 15-minute time blocks, and sometimes they went a little bit over, but we tried to keep them to, we tried to streamline the process as much as we could.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
people would come in and we would do a Zoom meeting with somebody, and there'd be maybe 3 or 4 of us from like our pastoral team there. And so we just did the prophetic presbytery online, just like via Zoom, like what you were talking
Wow.
about. But it
Wow.
was really cool because it was like other people that we wouldn't normally have had the opportunity to do that with, that were like tuning in from our live streams. Like we had people from like, because we have a Spanish service now that we do at
Oh,
11:15
yeah.
a.m. on Sundays. And so we had a bunch of people from Mexico that were like, oh, can I get in on that? And so people were like, as they saw that we were doing it because we were talking about it, more people were coming in. So like we had the opportunity to minister prophetically with others that we didn't
Wow.
have, wouldn't have normally had the opportunity to do because of the fact that we were online. So it's just been interesting with like all of the challenges that there's been, right, for the
Hmm.
past couple of years, and all the changes and shifts that
Hmm.
we've had to make. How there's been for sure a lot of challenges, and maybe we've lost certain things, but I feel like we've also had opportunity to kind of gain things in different ways, and have new opportunities and new different ways of impacting people than what we've had before. So it's been cool.
That's really cool. Yeah. I think, yeah, in general, I think the online stuff has been really good. And I think in a weird way, it's kind of accelerated a Matthew principle that those who have more is given to them, and those who don't have what little they had was taken away from them. It's like people who are aggressively hungry about the kingdom and God, like were able to gain more, and people who were sort of estranged and on the fringe and weren't connected, and they whatever little fellowship and
Yeah.
discipleship they had was probably stripped from them. Not because it
Mm,
was, I mean, they could still access the online, but it wasn't, the rhythm was thrown off, and so they drifted. And it's sad,
sure.
but it's like, it's funny. It's kind of how you see that taking place. And um, so yeah, it's, even as pastors here, like we've been like looking at that, and we're like, oh, how can we engage people? But at the
Mm,
same time, people self-select. People decide whether they want to come and be a part or not. And COVID sort of showed that.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how, and I don't want to say this in a way like I'm not coming against or trying to condemn anybody or anything like that, but it's interesting, like when something like this, like this pandemic, when something like this happens, it really does, I think, expose whatever's within us. Like there's a lot of things
Mhm.
in life that will do that. And
Right,
so if you're the kind of person where you're looking for an excuse to disconnect, or you'd be
right,
happy to have a reason not to do something, not to fellowship, not to go to church,
right,
not to
right.
whatever it is, other things as well, not just church stuff. But if you're looking for that, then the
Mhm.
pandemic for sure provided you with plenty of excuse where you could do that,
Yeah,
and now you can hide and not maybe feel as guilty because you can feel like you can justify it. But then on the other hand, if it's something that you really value, like fellowship,
mhm,
being with people, being in community,
right,
then it was probably challenging for sure. But maybe it even cause there to be a greater hunger on the inside of you, where I think, we value each other more now than we did before, valuing
Yeah.
relationships and valuing community and valuing like so many things that I think we've taken for granted, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's just funny how that works in life. Like like you can find a reason to make an excuse to disconnect, or that very same thing, if you allow it to, can have a completely opposite impact where it actually causes you to grow and go deeper.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like, I personally, through the pandemic and quarantine, like, times I had accelerated growth. Like, I learned things,
Mhm.
I developed things in me. Um, it was almost like a second education experience for me because it was like all this. I had time to do things that I always wanted to do that didn't never got to do. So that was really powerful for me,
Yeah.
um, and I see that, in our challenge, our prophetic edge challenge, we had, people were hungry, found us, and so we had more people participate from South Africa than from the US.
Mm. Wow.
For a little while, yeah, we get the metrics on the Facebook group. We had more people. We were in Binghamton, New York, and we had more people participating from Cape Town, South Africa, than from Binghamton. It was like our
Wow.
local churches here,
That's
like this.
crazy.
Yeah, it was like, but it was the people that are hungry find their way in, and they find how to
Mm.
continue to feed and glean and learn and grow. And I think that's the
Wow.
beautiful thing about technology. It's like, people, if you're hungry for something, you can find it. And so I'm excited because I have all of this, like, me personally, like, I've been reading and studying and growing in certain dimensions of my vocation that I haven't even begun to express them yet because I'm still digesting them, but I've been like studying them for over a year, and it's like so exciting. And
Mm.
Duke, I'm wondering, like, how about you? Like, how would you say you've grown through pandemic in a way that you never would have otherwise?
Man, that's that's a really good question. I think that me personally, or
Yeah.
church-wise, or what are we
Well,
talking,
whatever
more
you want
more
to
so
say.
me
Yeah.
personally? Yeah, so just like on a personal level, it's been crazy because, like, I think that that's been a big thing for me, is like having that passion, that hunger, that desire to want to connect more with people. I mean, like on a practical level, something that a lot of things for me came out of this, being in lockdown and being, kind of like having having all of my regular jobs and like sources of income stripped from me, like at the beginning of the pandemic, at least, and kind of like, using that as an opportunity to pursue some other things. And so a lot of
Mhm.
things came out of the pandemic for me, as far as like just content and writing and stuff like that. I mean, this podcast, for example, I was already podcasting before the pandemic, but this podcast I just started earlier this year,
Mhm.
and something that's been really awesome, that I've really have taken a very strategic approach to relationship building, to meeting new people, to branching out, to like actually like purposely going outside of like my denomination and stuff like that, to just kind of like connect with more people that are, not necessarily, that don't necessarily think the same way as me. I think that there's been so much in my mind, like related to just how disconnected I think society has gotten. Like I think that that's one thing
Mhm.
for sure, that the pandemic, again, I don't think it caused it, I think it exposed it.
That's
This
a good way to say it.
desire in people to, kind of be combative and to become tribal and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And I think that there's validity to finding, a lot of Christians use the terminology of like finding your tribe. I think there's validity to that, like as far as finding people that are like-minded with you, people that you can walk with and do life together. I think that that's really healthy, but not to the extent where you're like rejecting other people just because they think differently, or because
Yeah,
they move differently, or
factious.
because they're from a different stream or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that really, came out. And so, just one of the sort of practical approaches that I've taken to my own growth is just sort of wanting to connect with people and have conversations with people that don't necessarily, think or believe exactly the same way that I do. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, man, there's this thing just in my mind right now, and it sounds so simplistic. But I'm excited. Like, the thing that I'm probably the most excited about is, like, again, this is gonna sound so simple. I just want people to know Jesus. Like, that's so simple. But what I mean by that is, um, I I I want people to really meet Jesus for and know him for who he really is.
Mm.
I think that in the church that something that's happened, um, is that I'm trying to find like words for this because I haven't really articulated this before. I think that we've dumbed a lot of things down. I think that we've belittled and undervalued how good God really is, how good grace really is,
Mm.
just the awesomeness of the lordship of Jesus, where
Mm.
I think that we've allowed like a religious spirit in a lot of ways to creep in and to like keep things so surface level with church and make it about rules and regulations and do's and don'ts
Mm.
and stuff like that. And I just think that people are so hungry right now for an authentic move of God, for authentic relationship, that when people like actually discover who Jesus really is, like who he actually is and how good of a king and leader and shepherd and
Mhm.
friend and how good of a father God is, like when people
Mhm.
can get past the religiousness to really discover who God is, that I mean
Mhm.
that's what everybody wants. I mean it's in the heart of every single person. And it's just something that I'm
Yeah.
kind of sensing, that almost getting back to the simplicity of the Bible, the simplicity of scripture, the simplicity of the truth of who God
Right.
is something that I really think that is going to be just becoming more and more apparent. I think that, like, when the pendulum swings so far in one direction, that people just become sort of disillusioned by stuff that isn't really
Mhm.
that important. You know, like there's
Mhm.
been a lot of people, I think, going to war for things that I mean that figuratively, going to
Mhm.
war for issues that are not really that important at the end of the
Mm.
day. And I think that it's something I'm excited about, is people like really waking up to the reality of just the simplicity of the goodness of God. And so I kind of went off on a rabbit trail there, but
No, it's
but
good.
as far as me, like, um, you know, how I think that I've one way that I feel like there's been growth in my life is being able to sort of simplify in certain areas, and really just, not that I've like arrived at this or anything like that. I'm still like a knucklehead in my relationship with God in so many ways, but like just kind of I feel like I've had the opportunity just in my walk with the Lord to rediscover the simplicity of God's goodness and the
Mm.
simplicity of God's love. And um, yeah, when I say simplicity, I don't mean that it's actually simple, because, like, we
Right.
know God's love is so multifaceted, like we'll never get to the end of it. I don't mean his love itself is simple. I mean that life with Jesus really is simple when we make it
Mhm.
about him and not about all
Mhm.
these other issues, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know if
Yeah,
I
yeah.
answered your question or not.
No, it's good. It's like, coming back to first things, strengthening the foundational parts of what life's all about, which is loving God and enjoying him forever, Um, I love that. And I think it's really has a powerful message for today, because people have a crisis of meaning that, you know, nothing is meaningful, or everything is meaningful, and therefore nothing is meaningful. And I think people really struggle
Mm,
to find, why is life worth living? Can my life be meaningful? And I don't think that this is just a classic atheist struggle. I think it's a Christian struggle too. Like, I think
mm,
people have been told that different things in the Christian faith are meaningful, and they come to the end of them and realize, oh, they're not. Like you said, the rules.
yeah.
I think that's when we say toxic religion or religious spirit. What we mean is a false appraisal of what's truly valuable in the faith.
Hmm.
And so to say, like, this practice or this doctrine or this dogma or this fill in the blank pet thing that we call valuable, when they come to the bottom of it and realize that it isn't valuable, and then they're like, well, what is, what is really valuable, what is really meaningful
Mm-hmm.
about life? And I think you're right. It's God Himself, and the man Jesus, God man Jesus Christ is the representation, the perfect picture.
Yeah.
That's where real meaning is. That's where real life is. But yeah, there's something about all that adulation and maybe just the busyness of life pre-pandemic that was causing a cloudiness that, at least from my end too, I feel there's some clarity. I'm in my wife's basement office, and so you might hear a furnace kick on here. It's the
I heard
fan
that,
kicking
but
over that.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I agree with you, and I think that's one of the beautiful things with the pandemic is giving us space and time to pray, to actually spend time with God and attend to our inner court relationship, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's like, kingdom, talk about kingdom living and, the lifestyle of the kingdom. And it's got to be about the king, right? Like, it's got to be all about him. And
mm-hmm.
yeah, I just think that we can make it about, just make life about so many things that, they seem like a big deal. Like they seem
Right.
like like this is what really matters at the moment. But if we're able to just kind of zoom out
Mm-hmm.
and to just recognize that there are more important things, and
Yeah.
and any time that we get distracted in our pursuit, because so often, I mean, I think the most profound distractions in life are good things usually, like we can get very distracted by ministry. We can get very distracted by serving. We can get very distracted by, running our business, by, we can get distracted by so many things where we can, really, I think, learn. And this is something that I think I feel like I've been learning, hopefully been growing in this area, at least been more aware of it, is like, I can do the same activities in my day from a place of being disconnected from God. And I could do those exact same activities from a place of being in fellowship and being in communion with him. Because,
Yeah.
life in the spirit is not all about, it's not just like those moments of the day when I've got my Bible in front of me, or when I'm listening to a worship song, or when I'm saying my prayers, or whatever. Like, life in the
Yeah.
spirit, it goes so far beyond that. I mean, those times where we're alone with God, that's so key. It's so important. It kind of fuels us and helps us to make sure that we're keeping him first in our life. But it's not just that, and then we do the rest of life. It's
Right.
like I can become so disconnected in my mind from this reality, but his presence is always with me. We always carry his presence with us. And so when I'm doing ministry, or when I'm with my family, or when I'm running my business, or at my job, or at school, or whatever it is that I'm doing, like,
Right.
God is there. He's present with me, and I can maintain that place of fellowship and connection and communion with him. And, you know, I just, I think that we just way, way overcomplicate stuff sometimes, man, in
Yeah, I love what
life.
you're saying. It's that whole incarnational aspect of the faith where it's like, we are connected. And in Genesis, what is it, Genesis 1 or 2, it says, tend and cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's this idea that the work, the tending and the cultivating they were supposed to be doing was worship. And so everything we do, it's like, it's all this
Yeah.
tending and cultivating work. It's not toil. It's this wonderful thing we get to do for God, inspired by God, empowered by God, and for his glory. Um, but yeah,
Mm.
that's a matter of like, where's my consciousness? Am I thinking
Yeah.
about it that way, or am I doing it in service of some other end or some other goal, some other motivation? Uh, Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and to ask yourself, and to, I think, like you said, we were talking about before this went live, like times of fasting are so powerful for that, and
Mm.
even a regular prayer life, it is a focused, like, prayer time is powerful for anchoring you in that. Um,
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, listen, we're kind of getting close to the end of this year.
Mhm.
What are you I don't know, man, what's on your mind? What's on your heart? What are you excited about? What do you see God doing either in your life or maybe even more grand scale for the church? Like what do you I don't know. Is there
It's a
anything
big
that you're
question.
just excited? Yeah, is there anything that you um are just excited about that that's on or that you feel like has been on God's heart?
Yeah, it's a big question. Well, I can only speak for what he's doing in my life, but I I just, to me, the thing that keeps me up at night is are people hearing the gospel, and
Mhm.
are they getting presented the message of Christ in a way that actually, like, makes sense to them? And
Yeah.
I grew up in a charismatic Pentecostal tradition in church, and we focus a lot on that inner court life, so to speak. This presence of God, living with God, hearing the word of the Lord and obeying, just being sensitive to His presence, being, all that stuff devoted to God. But I realized that I had this weird feeling. I think I was 12 years old, and we had another revival meeting in our church, and the Holy Spirit's going, and people are dancing, and all sorts of gifts of the Spirit are happening. And I remember we went out. It got so fiery that we spilled out of the building, and we all started worshiping outside and dancing. And I remember being out there and feeling really dumb, like really like, what are we doing? And I remember thinking,
Mm.
what do other people think about this? And I was like, no, I will be more undignified for the Lord. But I thought, wait, how do people understand what we're doing? And then I began to think about everything. Like, what we're doing here at church makes no sense and adds no value
Wow.
to people who aren't familiar with this cultural context. And then I went to
Mm.
public school, and I realized the things that happen on a Sunday morning are completely irrelevant for the average unsaved person. Just no, doesn't
Wow.
make and I realized that, like, all of our inner court life teaching ministry as pastors and teachers, it becomes a kind of inside baseball. It's like we're debating over what the best way to signal to steal second is, and we're teaching people about that.
Wow.
And while stealing second is an important part of the game, it doesn't have anything to do with somebody who just doesn't know the game at all. It's like we still have to, like, hit the ball, run around the bases, get home. You know what I mean? So it's like we've
Yeah.
lost the forest for the trees,
Wow.
and it's okay, and it's good. But, like, people outside, I just realized that there's so much of this thing we call kingdom life, kingdom spiritual Christianity. It it's not really talked about or articulated in a way that makes sense to people outside of it.
Mm.
It's like we want, I just see that the only thing we present to outsiders is, like, our pitch, our presentation is, here's your sinful life, here's the remedy of Jesus Christ, we'll weave in some personal testimonies, and then let's do some signs and wonders, and that's it. And it just has, again, people have a crisis of meaning, right? Like, we as a
Mm.
Western society, we've dominated nature, we've dominated all of these things, we have everything we ever could want or need. We're the most affluent society in history, and it means nothing. I still don't know if
Wow.
why am I here. And whenever we're
Wow.
not answering that for people, we're just saying, uh, you could have a supernatural transit, existential experience by getting touched by the Spirit. And it's like, the person's like, okay, I could do that with LSD too. Like, what does that mean? Well, you would know
Wow.
God. Well, why would I want to know God? You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's like, it's just not, we're
Mhm.
not making it obvious to people. And this question of, like, are people hearing about God in a way that actually speaks to them? Wider society, are they hearing? How can people, believe without a preacher, right? How can they hear without a preacher? How can
Yeah.
they come to faith
Right.
without hearing? And how can they hear without a preacher? But is the preaching making sense to people and like actually engaging them with where their current understanding is?
Wow.
And increasingly since 12 on, I've realized it's not like, and I didn't know what to do about it. I was just like, continue to feel this disconnect. And I'm like, that's why I've always been like reticent about classical evangelism. Cause I'm like, we're not even in there. Like someone coming into you and like engaging you in public, a stranger, like this is weird. And I for a while, I was really into the signs and wonders and power of evangelism. I still love that. I still believe in that. But again, I saw that at the end of the day, where people live, when they really think about the big issues of life, they don't just think about their own personal health and wealth. There's that, which, healing and intervention, gifts of the Spirit could deal with. But they're thinking about like they're dealing with what is the world about? What is this world, and how does it work, and what meaning does it have, and what about me in the world? Nobody's doing it that deep. No one's saying it like that philosophically, but people feel that. That's why they're tuned into fictional stories and narratives and science fiction and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, because it gets at that in a fictional way, and people are fascinated. What are the metaphysics that are behind everything? And so I just been going down that road and studying thinkers and theologians and scripture and adjusting my preaching and adjusting my ministry to say, okay, is what I'm saying applicable and helpful and adding value to people who aren't even familiar with a cultural Christian expression? Part of that happened to me was I became close friends with this community college teacher from Paris, and we've since hosted each other at each other's respective homes. He hosted us in Paris. We've hosted him here in the U.S. a couple of times, and in this discussion, he's a law professor, and he's an atheist, and he has there was a Protestant minister in his family 5 generations back, but that's the last time there was faith in his family. And so he doesn't know any believers, doesn't have any personal friends who are Christians except for us. And so we'd have all these discussions, but I realized and it would confirm my suspicion that nothing about what we would talk about on a Sunday morning means anything to him. It it's completely irrelevant. And I think it's Bonhoeffer who might have said it, that our spirituality is privately engaging and publicly irrelevant. And so I've been wrestling with this, but I realized that talking about what is the meaning of your life, why are you here, what are you going to do with why you're here, and just going down that line of thinking and seeing what the Lord would say in that realm and helping people discover meaning for their life, that has been a fruitful plane of thinking and study and prayer. And realizing that we as Christians, we do have the meaning of Jesus Christ and fellowship with God and expanding his kingdom and cultivating and tending his presence garden till it infiltrates the whole earth, right? Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. It's that mission that we're co-laboring with Jesus on, to make the earth heavenly, right? A new creation. And that's meaningful. And I think everybody is intrinsically feeling we should make this place better, right? Like when people get their act together, like what do? They try to make their surroundings and their life better. And I think that's a kingdom impulse, and we can coherently give them a bigger story that's actually biblical truth. But we've got to start to think that way and talk that way and offer that. And so that's where I've been going. That's what burns in my heart. And I see the churches continue, and to answer your question, what is the church next year? I see the church has it's a make or break moment. Either we start engaging the public sector, the public square, with a message that is the power of God for the salvation of man, or we continue to speak to them in inside baseball language and get frustrated that they don't get it and blame the devil.
Yeah, man. that so like and you even said a minute ago that like you don't necessarily have the answers because it's something that you're thinking through, but I mean, do you have what do you think, man? Like, because I think that what you're saying is so true, and like how do you think, or what are some ways that you think that we can begin to kind of shift that? um
Yeah.
I mean, what's in your head?
Yeah, well, I've been just again, like the Lord's been taking me this holy curiosity. I told you it kind of showed up when I was 12, and then it began to build. And so I've discovered several thinkers, Christian and non, that have helped me unpack this. But one of the things that's been most helpful is this idea that um, this I got to credit Jordan Peterson with this. I love Jordan Peterson. I'm not sure he's like
Yeah, me too.
he's an independent thinker for sure, and brilliant, one of the
Yeah.
most brilliant thinkers of our time. But his book, actually, the Maps of Meaning book that he developed over 15 years of his clinical psychology practice and his classes he taught at Harvard, is incredible, and it really helps bridge this gap, broach this topic. And when you read the book and listen to him in connection with more classic apologists like Francis Schaeffer
Hmm.
and Os Guinness, it really the lights turn on. But one of the things that Peterson articulates almost better than anybody else I've read is he says that our Western society is explicitly atheist, so that in our way of thinking about life, it's God doesn't exist. We've graduated beyond God. We've mastered nature.
Right.
No one's afraid of it.
Right.
Other than pandemic, it's this new, like the power of nature, if you speak well, as somehow threatening us as humanity. But before that, we had no problems. We had mastered everything. Um, so, and that's an important idea, because before that, like we want to talk about Reformation and Luther and Calvin. We love that. Like
Hmm.
the reason that it was so vibrant was because everybody had to rely on God to somehow overcome their fear of the unknown, of nature, of bubonic plague, flood, right, starvation,
Yeah.
infant mortality rate 50%, like a kid's gonna die, these things that are
Yeah.
awful, that we since mastered because of prescription drugs and modern science. So that thing, that unknown tragedy at your door thing made people religious.
Mm.
That's an outer court ministry. Outer court ministry. This is
Yeah.
Abraham
Yeah.
Kuyper. He says outer
Yeah.
court ministry is people's needs, right? People reaching out to God because they have needs.
Hmm.
But people had bigger felt needs 500 years ago than they do now. So anyway, back to
Yeah.
Peterson. The idea that people have these bigger felt needs no longer do. So we describe our reality materialistically, objectively. And so the science is, we pit science versus faith. And science is all about describing what is the nature of reality, right? What
Yeah.
is the wall made of?
Hmm.
What is this mind made of?
Hmm.
But it can't tell you why. It can't tell you the
Wow.
value or the meaning of the reality it's describing. So once you buy into a scientific only view of society, then you have a society that you can perfectly describe, but you don't know why it's there. You don't know why you're in
Hmm.
it. And you don't know what's more important than other things within it. All of that comes to you through the realm of something else that's not science. And so
Wow.
Peterson would say that we're atheists in our description, but religious in our practice. So like I could
Yeah.
believe, you see this with atheists, like materialist atheists all the time. They say there's no God, but they're not killing people. They're
Right.
following some code of ethics. And it makes no sense. Like, okay, if there's
Hmm.
no guiding principles here and nothing is more valuable than other, there's no meaning to life, then do what you want,
Right.
right? You shouldn't feel guilty. But you don't hear about like these famous atheists like having a slew of murders that they're covering, like they're trying to appear as moral people so that more people listen to
Sure.
them. It's like, why do you have to be a moral person as an atheist to have credibility? Even that's a contradiction of terms. People should not want you to be a credible person and require that of you to listen to your claims over here that if there's no God, then you don't have to be
Right.
credible for people to respect. Even that's a contradiction. So
Right.
understand that everybody is implicitly religious. I mean, they have a meaning for life that even if they say there isn't one, or they have a belief that there's some governing higher spirit to life, and they live that out, even if they're in denial of it consciously.
Wow.
And so Peterson takes this to another level, which is super helpful. And he says, okay, and it's a thought model that's maybe helpful for evangelism. So he says he has these concentric rings of meaning. So at the core is a father and a businessman, right? This is an American hypothetical American person. It's a man who has a father and a husband, and he's a businessman.
Uh-huh.
And we can imagine that. So he says he's atheist, but has a business. He wants to be a good father. He wants to be a good husband. Well,
Sure.
what is his concept of father and good husband? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from maybe American culture, American dream, right? I shouldn't hit my wife and I should send my kids to college. Well, where does that come from? Okay, that kind of comes from humanism, right? John Locke and divine right, human
Yeah.
rights, and everybody has a right to freedom and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and people should have free speech and good opportunity in life. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so human life is valuable, it's sacred, and people should have freedom to pursue the life they want. Well, where does that idea, that humanist idea, come from? Well, it comes from the Christian Judeo tradition, right? We're made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore we have free will to choose things and choose good and choose evil,
Yeah.
and we're free agents. And because we're in the image of God, our life is more dignified and worth saving than animals, and it's worth, safeguarding and
Sure.
and seeing what we want our lives to flourish and the lives of others around us to flourish. That is an inherently Christian Judeo idea. It comes right from the scripture. So then
Right.
right there, you can see that this person is religious, even though they deny it.
Mm-hmm.
So what he says is, and I think this is so powerful, is that when people deny that their meaning for their life, this implicit widest ring, right, that I'm somehow made in the image of God and have godlike qualities, and I'm sovereign for myself, can make my own choices. People deny that essential religious truth, then their life here that they're living religiously doesn't match the beliefs that they adopt to try to explain it, and they start to encounter all contradictions. So my life, this businessman, let's say he denies that there's a God, so he has to adopt some other kind of practice to explain the meaning of life, because the one he's living out, he's denying. So
Okay. Yeah.
so he starts taking out, what's, for instance, Buddhist practices. Well, I don't believe in God, but I do have a yoga practice over here because it brings me peace. So now
Right.
this person has to turn to other religious traditions or other spiritual practices to try to manage the contradictions of how one sees the world versus how one's living in the world.
Mm.
As opposed
Wow.
to, as Christians, as a kingdom believer, I'm like, yes, I'm made in the image of God. Yes, that means I should have rights. Not because the government says I get to have rights, it's because God created everybody to have
Right.
human rights. He gifted this to us to be self-ruled beings, right? And it works best if we submit that our ability to rule ourselves to God, then we flow congruently. So anyway, just starting to articulate that and helping people say, like, you're not say you don't believe in God, you're not religious, but you want a better marriage and you're looking to stay married, or you're faulting Jeff Bezos
Right.
for his marriage breaking up. Like, why do you care? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are romance movies where the couple stays together that's still the top selling things at the box office? Like,
Yeah.
why is that? We can answer that with scripture. But yeah, so just diving in that and thinking through that, and realizing we have to now offer fresh biblical answers for the meaningful life for people who are they're actually living out, Westerners are living out a biblical narrative, but because they're denying the truth of it, they're failing at it. I want a healthy, whole, lasting marriage, but I'm saying there's no God, so I can do what I want. So now I'm sleeping around, and now I'm wondering why I'm destroying the thing that I'm trying to have.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's like
Wow.
you're
Yeah.
not, you're
Yeah.
incongruent in your narrative. That's why you're experiencing mental health issues. because your storyline in your head doesn't match what your impulses want to do. And you could line that up with the truth that'll set you free. So just, I don't know, this has turned into sort of an intellectual philosophical discussion, but I think Schaeffer, for instance, Schaeffer 40 years ago at L'Abri and his books and his work really unpacked that for us. He saw this coming because he lived in atheist Switzerland. He saw this coming before most Americans did. And he sort of said, you know, philosophy has become anti-philosophy, meaning most philosophers from the time of Hegel until now, well, Immanuel Kant really started it. They said there's no such thing as truth, right? There's really no knowable universe. There's no knowable absolute truth outside the scientific. And so once they did that, then the field of philosophy became, the objective of it changed from knowing what is the universe to saying it's an anti-philosophy. It's all unknowable.
Right.
And that caused people, as Francis says so eloquently, to fall below the line of despair. And so I think playing those thinkers, him and then Peterson, and then I love Abraham Kuyper, who did a lot of this work as a member of parliament and a prime minister of Holland, of the Netherlands, about 100 years ago. He hammered a lot of this out as well in a more of a political way. I think are really helpful for our time. Like, we've got to start engaging in the public sphere and offering meaning, offering things that really help people. I see all this behavior therapy, like, if you take ice baths, you'll stop being anxious. It's like, okay, like, you could do practices to help your mental health, but like, those are band-aids. Like, the narrative in your brain is jacked up and it's causing you to have bad emotions. Like, you should get that straightened out. That might mean you have to submit to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ eventually. But you might not want to. But it will help solve some of your issues.
So like getting people to the why, right? Like the why, not just this is what we do because we do it because it's what the Bible says that we're supposed to do. Like, it's like, okay, but why? Like, why do we do those things? Because I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think the further that we progress as a society, the more these questions become important to people, because the way that people are, you know, sort of evolving, like the way that we think is differently today than as you said, than it was 500 years ago, than it was 100 years ago, the way that collectively as society. And so it's amazing. And I really believe what you're saying, because like within all of us is this like inbuilt desire for connection to God, because we're created in his image. We're designed that way. We're designed for him. And so much of life is us trying to figure out an alternative to God, because for one reason or another, whatever that might be, we don't want God. Even for believers, like even for Christians, like we want God overall, but then there's areas of my life where like I would rather God not touch that part of my heart. Like, I would rather fill that with something else. And I've got to fill it with something, because anytime there's just like a void in me of something that's not being filled, it's like the vacuum is going to get filled up with something. I'm going to find something to put there. I'm going to find, you know, some other ideology or some other philosophy or some other practice, or as you said. And that's why I think so many people, like, they're looking for other things that really end up just kind of being band-aids to kind of mask the pain or the hurts or the shame, or, you know, whatever we're talking about, whatever it might be, but to find things to kind of be a cover up to fill a void, when like God is the only one who's perfectly designed to actually meet those deep needs of our heart and of our life, you know? And so I do think that we've done people a disservice when, again, just coming back to this, like when we've given people like just rules and regulations, and we've made it about like a very sort of one-dimensional kind of a thing. Well, you just need Jesus. Okay, but why? Well, because the Bible says, yeah, but how do I know I can trust the Bible? Like, you know what I mean? And so these things, and so like a lot of the traditional quote unquote arguments that Christians have used in the past in terms of evangelism and presenting the gospel to people, they don't really work anymore, because people are like they
Hmm.
don't think the same way that they
Yeah,
did back then, you know.
yeah, and I think maybe it's important to add here that what makes something, what makes a belief meaningful,
Hmm.
and what makes a belief system meaningful is its ability to help you move forward in life
Yeah.
toward a desirable future. That's what everybody, I think, really, I mean, this is a big assumption, but I think everybody really wants to ultimately enter into some kind of, if you will, promised land or desirable future. We could say American dream. And so they're looking for ways to get there, and they need a coherent storyline or action plan or strategic plan or mantra, you name it, need some way to go from this painful, difficult place I'm in now to some other place that's more desirable in the future. You see this, and this is the same thing in social justice narratives, right?
Right.
They're keeping it from the good stuff from us. We got to crush them, push them down, so that we can get on into our freedom, our you feel. And so they're trying to figure out how to get to that desirable future. And that's the brilliance of the God of Abraham. He said, leave this country and I'll take you to a place where you don't know. And so people, they turn to powers and sources of meaning to get them there, and those end up being
Hmm.
idols. But the God of Abraham was the unseen God who actually within 400 years delivered on the promise he gave to Abraham, and did bring people into a literal land. So it becomes this beautiful picture that
Mm.
we can draw abstractions from, saying, okay, our God is a God who, the real God does bring you into a promised land. It does bring you into a
Yeah.
desirable future as you follow him,
Hmm.
not other idols and other uh, deceiving meanings. And I think the scientific revolution was really powerful. And I'm not anti-science. I just think that science is powerful to describe reality, but it doesn't give us the tools to rank order its value. That's
Yeah.
different. And so we need to rank order the value of the things in a reality, so we know what to prioritize, so we can move forward to take action. You can't
Wow.
just knowing the molecular structure of something or the mathematical equation of how something works doesn't tell me what to do with my life tomorrow. It doesn't help me take
Mm.
action, and it leads to analysis paralysis. Um, so that's why I think the gospel is the power of God for the salvation of man. I think that's what Paul's statement in Romans 1:16 is so brilliant. It's brilliant along these levels because it is the power of God to help people move from where they are into that place of meaning and flourishing and beauty, both spiritually and as a society nationally. I mean, the reality is that the Western civilization we live in that's prosperous is because the Christian Judeo ideas worked.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Monogamous marriage, people who stay married are wealthier than people who divorce. That's the obvious statistic. So you want to
Wow.
preserve wealth throughout your generations, so your grandkids can have it better than you did. Stay married. But that's a Christian Judeo idea, right? So it's like,
Right.
here, that's a
Hmm.
small family version, but across all versions, like, why have freedom of speech? It's not obvious that people should have freedom of speech. Well, because we're made in the image of God, and God spoke everything to reality, so we should have freedom to speak, so that we can speak new things into reality. Um, but
You know
that
what?
threatens governments.
Yeah, I've been hearing more and more. I've been hearing more and more secular people, secular, thinkers and public people
Hmm.
um, say things like this that they'll say things like ascribing to the traditional sort of Judeo-Christian order of things, or the things that
Hmm.
that they value. Like it's really, really helpful, and it'll help you become a better person. It'll help you, enjoy life. Like it'll help you do all these things. And so like they like that aspect of it, but they don't like
Yeah.
the God, aspect of it, in terms of like they don't necessarily like ascribe to the idea of a creator, but they do. I'm finding more and more people like ascribing to the idea of the values of like what we
Hmm.
would call kingdom values, because they see the validity to it. Because like there's, as soon as you, like you mentioned, when truth was basically removed all those years ago, where it was like, well, there is no truth and all
Right.
these things are just essentially unknowable. When you remove truth from the situation to where there's absolute truth, and it's just like, oh, well, this is what's right for me and this is what's right for you, and like, we get into all that kind of stuff. Once you remove truth from the equation, it's like, well, then, like, where do you draw the lines? Like, where do you put the parameters? And
Right.
so, like, I think that like what you're saying is so true, because really within the minds of people, there really is this thing of, well, we've got to ascribe to some kind of truth. Like there's this,
Yeah.
like there's a desire for it, there's a hunger for it, and the
Right.
longer that you stay away from the truth, I think the further you go down that road, the more you realize that stuff just begins to, like, the more and more that stuff really begins to unravel, and
Right.
there's no stability, there's no foundation. If there's no
Right.
truth, there's no foundation, there's no stability, there's no
Right.
parameters. Again, like the further you go down that path, it's just like, well, then why does anything matter anymore? And
Right.
it's destructive thinking, and it leads a society, like, I mean, let alone an individual person, of course, but on a grander
Right.
scale, it leads society into like a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today. And it's like, well, where are they going to draw the line? Like, when are they going to cut this off? Like, when are they going to realize that, like, this is not working? You know
Right.
what I mean? And it just seems like it just, that line of like what's acceptable and what's okay and what we value, like that line just gets pushed further and further and further and further down the road, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways, because there is no truth, there's no ascribed value
Right.
or order to things.
Right. And I think as the
So
church, we've retreated into our cozy Christian centers, communities, so that
yeah, man,
we
come
can
on.
keep talking about what's fun for us, rather than doing the heavy lifting and getting out there and having this message
Wow.
for people, and taking the time to listen hard enough to the people, the society around us, to know how to talk to them.
Yeah.
We don't. That's another problem. Is just like we don't want to take the time to be in community, in the world, to listen long enough to have a response. We just
Dude, that's
respond with
such a big
outrage.
deal.
And
Yeah.
so, where do I see the church going in the next year? Lord willing, I'd love to see. Friedrich Nietzsche said that God is dead, and he meant that not in a, like, he meant it's sad that the
Right.
Western mind's pursuit of truth that was birthed by God has
Mhm.
caused us to turn around and interrogate God and find him false, and therefore reject him. But I think that I would, the Jews did the same thing 2,000 years ago to Jesus, and Jesus left them. And I just believing that God is going to be resurrected in the consciousness of the Western mind, and that
Mhm.
God has allowed this for a time, but he's going to show himself strong and recapture the consciousness of men and women in the West.
That's so good, man. One thing that I always say is that when you have hope, when you have hope in the midst of a group of people that have none, you have authority. And I do think that you're 100% right about that, about how we've in so many ways retreated, and we've stayed within the four walls, and we've stayed in our little bubbles and communities. And there's so many people, man, that are hungry, like like so hungry because of all the disillusionment and everything else
Mm-hmm.
that they've lived. There's so many people that are so hungry, but they need an authentic representation and demonstration of who God
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And so I love that, man. I love what you're saying. Thank you so much for sharing your heart on that.
Thanks for
um
drawing it out.
yeah, brother. Well, hey, I know we gotta wrap this up, so I appreciate you, David. I always love our conversations. Thank you so much again, man, for doing this, and I know we'll do it again, because I'm always gonna want to have you back. I love talking to you, and I always feel like I grow just through my conversations with you, and you always make me think differently, think about new things that I hadn't really thought much about before, and I really value that, and I value our friendship, man. So thank you.
I value you. Thanks for having me, Duke.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to check out this episode. Really appreciate you guys. If it blessed you or added any value to your day, if you consider subscribing, sharing, leaving a review, I'd really appreciate that. David, real quick, was there anywhere that anything that's going on right now that you would want to point people to, or even just point people somewhere where they could check you out, check your content out, or some of your messages or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, you can go to uwcsom.com. We have some e-courses there. There are some free, some paid. It's United with Christ School of Ministry. It's the school of ministry I'm the dean of. And actually, on Saturday, we have a free seminar on five anointings of Christ from Ephesians 4, a fivefold ministry. And it's Jesus' plan to equip his church for
Yeah.
powerful impact in the world. And so we're taking a whole day to teach on that. You can go register for that for free at uwcsom.com and get in on the teaching.
That's awesome. Love it. All right, man. Well, thank you again. Thanks,
Bless you
everybody.
too.
See you later.